Alrighty then. Well, hello and welcome. So this is a introduction episode. Should be pretty quick. Just an episode to introduce the Leadership Crossroads podcast. So this podcast, we're going to take a look at the world through the lens of leadership. We're going to study and discuss how various subjects intersect, cross over, tie into, and are related to each other. We're going to take a deep dive into ideas, possibly into unexpected places, looking for the connecting fundamental ideas. So expect to discuss everything from health and wellness to Stoicism to stories from history, much more. So just a quick little blurb about me. So my name is Andrew. I consider myself to be just an average person who is, just curious and loves to learn things. I have a background in the military, in training development, professional development, curriculum development, that sort of thing. Lean Six Sigma, I have a background in that. Work in manufacturing, also do data analysis and things like that. So that's kind of a quick thing about me. I am interested in things to do with American history, technology, Stoicism, philosophy, psychology. I like to hike. I'm into fitness and health and wellness. I like learning techniques, like learning how to learn kind of stuff, the learning about the brain, how it works, and how to kind of leverage that to our advantage. Also productivity and other things as well. So just kind of items that I find interesting. So I'm also a family man. I consider myself to be a person of faith. And some other weird things about me is I like to quote The Office or Seinfeld or Friends. I like Microsoft Excel and doing stuff in there. So if that tells you anything about me. The first few episodes are going to be just kind of solo, and they're just going to be kind of basically bullet points that I put into a PowerPoint or a Word document and just kind of riff off of. But I hope to eventually get into interviews and collaborations with other people in the future. So basically, the way that this is going to go is I'm just going to kind of discuss things that I find interesting or that I'm learning about. It's going to be an insight into what I'm thinking about and help me with the process and kind of help me get it right in my own mind. Although, getting an insight into my mind, that might be a scary place for some people. I don't know. So these episodes are not going to be highly edited. Although, if I make a mistake, I might erase it and can start over or something like that. But I'm not going to do a ton of editing on it. They'll mostly be just kind of the way they come out. So hopefully that works. Please be nice, bear with me, and kind of come along as I learn this process and hopefully get better over time. So remember, your reaction to my content is a reflection of you and not to me. Just keep that in mind. We're going to revisit that concept later of control and things like that. So just kind of put that in the back of your hat for now. So why the leadership lens? Well, so you're probably familiar with the term about, looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. And the thing there is that leadership is a lens, right? It's a pair of glasses that you put on and that you view the world through. And, there's many lenses that we can put on, but as we kind of look around and look at the world and put that new set of glasses on or adjust the lenses, however you want to phrase the analogy, you kind of can see things in a different light and kind of help put the right glasses on for the right situation. Like maybe you need protective glasses for, like PPE style, or maybe you need shades for when it's, really bright out. But putting the right pair of glasses on, or the right lens for the right situation, really can kind of make a big difference. And so that's kind of an analogy of the leadership lens or various glasses type analogy that I'll probably be referring back to quite often. So I just wanted to kind of introduce the topic here. The next thing by way of introduction is just kind of thinking about first principles thinking, otherwise known as sort of a back to basics or a fundamental principles or fundamental ideas kind of idea. So that's a kind of a common recurring theme that's going to be coming back because, as you can kind of distill something down to its most basic parts and pieces, you can really deeply understand what it is. And really one of the interesting things about breaking things down, or the back to basics thing, is that really all of the important things, whether it's in business or health or religion or psychology or whatever the thing that you're looking at is, it really comes down to kind of mastering the basics, really getting good at the basics. And so, the back to basics, or the first principles thinking, or the kind of fundamental ideas framework is going to be really recurring. And now that by no means that means that any of that stuff is easy. Just because something is simple doesn't make it easy. But if it's simple, it's easier to communicate. So really simple is a important thing that I'm going to try to do by keeping things relatively simple, but by no means does that mean those concepts are easy. So there's a great John Maxwell quote about how academics can take something simple and make it complex, and a communicator can take something complex and make it simple. And I really like that. Although there's a time and a place for both of those things, I think that when it comes to communication of these important things that we're going to be thinking about and talking about here, it's all about kind of keeping it simple and kind of getting that back to basics thing. There's another great quote that I refer to a lot from the book Atomic Habit by James Clear, where he's interviewing an Olympic coach, and he's asking the Olympic coach sort of what's the difference between a person who is at the Olympic level and someone who's like close to the Olympic level, or maybe getting started and headed in that direction. And that coach tells him essentially that the difference is someone who's able to do the fundamentals or the basics every single day without fail. And he says most people just get bored with it, and they can't show up every day and do the basics. And so that really stuck out in my mind as something that ties into a lot of different subjects. So continuing on with the thought process around like what are some of the basic things that we want to do, looking at the world in through a leadership lens, is sort of the idea of extreme ownership. And, so obviously Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, and then his series of books that followed that really kind of drive that idea. And that's going to be something that comes back and weaves in and out of all of these various topics that we talk about, and how if it has to do with me, then I own that, right? I own what's happening around me and what I'm doing. And the difference between ownership and accountability from a business sense is kind of interesting. It's often common to hear in a business setting, like, oh, we need to hold these people accountable for what they're doing. And really what I don't like about that is ownership is about me, is me taking ownership of these successes or the failures of the people around me, my team, who I'm responsible for, anything that impacts my world, right? That's ownership. But accountability is about you. It's about holding someone else accountable. So it's kind of the opposite. So yes, there does need to be accountability, but it's a problem when you start to think about, accountability as external versus ownership as internal, right? So that's kind of that external versus the intrinsic motivation of actions. So owning my actions, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. There's a really important leadership explanation that I've kind of been playing with, and that's like what is a leader and who is a leader. And so when we talk about leadership, like, it doesn't just apply to someone who's the CEO of a company, although it certainly does. It also applies to just the regular rank and file person. There's a great quote from John Maxwell, who he says that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And he quotes a study in there that was done that determined that even the most introverted person influences over 10,000 people over the course of their life. I mean, 10,000 people, that's a lot. So if you kind of really think about leadership and defining it, leadership, if you Google that term, you're going to get millions of results, really. I mean, everyone's got their own definition. So the way I think of leadership in the way that I'll be kind of referring to it in these episodes is that leadership is the influencing other people towards a goal or a mission or an objective. So you're influencing the actions of other people towards a goal through influence, right? It's those three parts, right? You're getting other people to do things, right? If you didn't need them to do things, then you wouldn't be a leader, right? It would just be you doing it. Although there is a certain degree of leading yourself and actions that you're in control of. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But essentially it's the influencing of other people to do something. And so, if you're at the coffee shop ordering a coffee, you're influencing that other person. And you can either have a positive interaction or a negative one, right? But either way, you're influencing them through your words and your actions. So when you, as a leader, demand somebody do something on your team, you're still influencing them, right? It's still influence. It may be a negative influence, or if you're maybe coaching or counseling somebody to try to nudge them in the right direction, right? You're influencing them. So no matter what you do, whether it's a more dictator approach or more of a coach approach, either way, you're influencing someone towards what you're trying to get them to do. And that's how I define leadership, as kind of influencing other people to accomplish a goal, a mission, objective, or whatever you're trying to do, right? So if you think about it in that way, every single person is a leader, because every single person interacts with other human beings on a daily basis. So another interesting topic is how this all interacts with Stoicism. And this has been a more recent interest of mine that I've started to look into. And, one of the first things that comes up that has to be mentioned when you talk about Stoicism is the fact that it's really been misunderstood, especially in more recent times, the word to mean someone who is like unemotional, uncaring, unfeeling, they're stoic and they're, not reacting or whatever. And really that's nothing at all what the philosophy is about. The quote unquote stiff upper lip mentality is referred to as Stoicism with a lowercase s. Stoicism with an uppercase S, or the philosophy of Stoicism, is much different. The essence of it, or at least the areas of it that we'll be visiting throughout the conversations, are about character development and about virtue and about what's under my control, or what's known as the dichotomy of control, or sometimes the trichotomy of control. What are the things that I control? What are the things that I influence? And what are the things that I do not control? It's the trichotomy of control. So character development, ownership, back to basics, leadership lens, right? So these are kind of some of the recurring themes that are going to continue to be developed throughout the episodes, and things that kind of continue to interweave with each other, including other subjects. So as we move on here, getting towards the end, with how do certain things interact with each other. So I've got an episode coming up where we kind of look at how does the legend of Sisyphus from Greek mythology interact with Marcus Aurelius of Roman descent, things in the ancient world. How does that relate to like our immune system, or with like military training, or how does that intersect with Buddhism, or what's the crossover with all of that and the animal kingdom, or the concept of the hero's journey in stories, giving birth, team building, productive failure? Like, how do all these things interact with each other? So we're going to have an episode coming up that covers that. So kind of an interesting, weird group of ideas and historical things all intersecting together along a similar thread. So it'd be interesting to see what that turns into. So one random example, just for the sake of giving you something to practically take away with you from today, is there's a great book by James Nestor called Breath. And this book is fascinating, and he talks about all things to do. He's like an investigative journalist type, and kind of went really deep into breath and breath work, and how just breathing differently impacts your psychology and physiology. And he had one kind of interesting insight. There's a lot of interesting insights from that book, but I'm just pulling out this one example where it shows an example of the intersection of different ideas or different topics that kind of intersect with each other. So he talks about how there's this connection that they found. So there's this thing called resonance breathing. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. There's actually a book called Heart, Breath, and Mind, which is all about resonance breathing, but you can check that out. And the idea behind resonance breathing is sort of matching the cadence of your breath to your heart rate. And everybody's is slightly different, but most people's are between 5.5, and 6 seconds. So you would basically breathe in for like 5.5 seconds, followed by a 5.5 second breathe out. And you would continue that cadence for a while. It's actually a similar concept to box breathing, if you're familiar with box breathing. Although with box breathing is like 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold, and then repeat that cycle. So box breathing is a great technique to lower your heart rate. So this is used in a number of disciplines, including with the military, to lower heart rate in any number of conditions like extreme stress or extreme cold or anything similar to that. And resonance breathing is similar, although it can be done at any time. The idea with resonance breathing is that it actually will, breathing in sync with your heart rate will actually lower your heart rate. Your HRV, your heart rate variability, goes in a positive direction. You feel better physically, but you also feel better psychologically. And it actually provides more oxygen to the brain than other types of breathing. And so, but here's where it kind of, that's interesting, but here's where it kind of ties in with other things. So there's been a couple of scientific studies that looked into this in various aspects. And one thing that they found is that there's actually quite a historical precedence for this resonance breathing, although it wasn't called that. But many traditions going back thousands of years actually have something similar that when it's done, results in the person doing resonance breathing without them even knowing that that's what they're doing. So for example, the Catholic prayer of the Rosary, if that's done in the traditional method, it actually results in the person breathing in a resonance breathing pattern. Same thing with the most famous of the Buddhist mantras. And also there's like a Kundalini chant that's the same breathing pattern. So it by saying the words in the pattern that they were historically done in, it actually puts the person into this resonance breathing pattern. And so the interesting thing is that, like, by doing these things, people for thousands of years have felt better after doing them. And of course, there's spiritual reasons for doing these things, of course. And that's a totally different subject. But the interesting part is that it also gives like I said, more oxygen to the brain, lowers the heart rate, HRV gets better, your heart rate variability. Makes you physically feel better. But when they do these scientific studies and notice that it's resonance breathing, you actually not just feel better, you have like physiological measurable items that show that you're actually putting your body in a more positive state. So just really an interesting kind of blend of like ancient and historical practice, modern science, and, even spirituality. I mean, it's a really kind of an odd, an odd grouping of information. So, but one that's really interesting. And so that book, Heart, Breath, Mind, there's actually like a program in there that you can follow to where there's a test you can run to figure out like exactly how many seconds in and out it matches your specific resonance breathing. And most people are within a second from each other, but it slightly varies. So you can kind of run through that, find out what yours is. And then there's like a plan for, I think it's like a 30 or 60-day practice that you do twice a day in that resonance breathing. And it measurably improves your HRV and your heart rate and the other things that we talked about. So really kind of an interesting grouping of things. So anyways, to recap, we talked a little bit about how we look at things through a leadership lens or a back to basics lens. We talked a little bit about extreme ownership and stoicism, although we're going to talk a lot more about that. And we talked about kind of this odd grouping of information like the legend of Sisyphus and the ancient world, and more things like the immune system, team building, hero's journey, that sort of thing, and an upcoming episode about that. We also talked about how character development is super important, and that's actually going to be what our next episode is about character. So stay tuned for that. And then we talked about James Nestor and his book Breath, and how resonance breathing matches with modern scientific studies on these historic traditions and how they were able to both physiologically and psychologically improve someone's health through prayer or through some of these other historical mantras. So kind of an interesting all-arounder there. I know through a bunch of things out there, there is a connective thread, and I hope that I made that obvious. But anyways, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate you. And I hope that you have something not only valuable and interesting that you learned, but something actionable and have a useful takeaway that you can put into practice for your life. So thanks for listening. And we'll see you on the next one. All right, just a quick disclaimer. So this podcast is created for entertainment and educational purposes only. Content discussed and shared is based on our interpretation and analysis, intended under fair use for informative and educational purposes. We aim to provide value through discussion and insight, encouraging learners to explore the original sources for further and more detailed information. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one.